Odell Beckham Jr. was officially released by the Cleveland Browns last week. And currently, actually just this morning, he's officially been placed on waivers for a potential team. Now, apparently he's interested in joining a contender. He would prefer free agency, although right now he's placed on waivers. He's been eyeing the Seattle Seahawks, is what he says. But the San Francisco 49ers and the New Orleans Saints are also teams to keep an eye on. Now, mind you, this was a guy who had kind of one really productive year with the Browns, had over 1,000 receiving yards. And then the last two seasons, the relationship between Mayfield and Odell Beckham Jr. on the field just regressed and really just almost had a deleterious effect on the team, so much so that Odell Beckham Jr. barely saw any targets the last two seasons. They kind of just had a lack of harmony. They were disjointed, disconnected, just never seemed, everything felt so forced. And that was the big problem. It wasn't like this seamless fit like perhaps we had all hoped. And obviously they got exacerbated by the social media posts by Odell Beckham Jr.'s father. And even the Browns actually just came out today, this morning, and they said that they were surprised by those kind of antics and those kind of demonstrations by the father posting videos on social media, and even LeBron kind of aiming to encourage the Browns to cut bait with Odell Beckham Jr. All of that kind of surprised him. Bottom line is now he's on waivers. Those are the teams that he's eyeing. So I want to first address the teams that he's laid out and then share the team that I believe would be the perfect fit. So first, when it comes to the Seattle Seahawks, the expectation is that potentially Russell Wilson could be coming back this week as soon as week 10, or I guess would be next week. So there's some high hopes that, hey, with the return of Russell Wilson, perhaps an arrival of Odell Beckham Jr., that can catapult them and kind of vault them into the postseason. The Seahawks right now are 3-5, tied for the worst record in the NFC West. So that's the one hurdle that I'm a little bit skeptical of when it comes to the Seahawks is you're behind the Arizona Cardinals and the Rams, which means you have to be one of the two other wild card teams, because the Rams are going to collect one, and now you're battling with the Saints, maybe the 49ers, maybe the Falcons, maybe the Vikings for one of those last two playoff spots, which is possible. But the problem is they've got a formidable duo at wide receiver with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And I think if you're a guy in Odell Beckham Jr., I know he says he wants to be a part of a contender, and I believe him. But at the same time, I think that you can want to be a part of a contending team, but also be a valuable and significant contributor to that cause. And I think that at the end of the day, Odell Beckham Jr., he's an athlete. He's a competitive guy at heart. And I think that he wants to be a big contributor. And I don't know if his role is going to increase significantly more with a team like Seattle than, let's say, Cleveland, who he was just on. So it's not that I wouldn't recommend Odell Beckham Jr. play alongside Russell Wilson. I don't know if the Seahawks are truly in contention right now. And to be honest, I just don't know how big of a role he's going to have with that team. So that's why I wouldn't necessarily recommend the Seahawks be the first team. And that's why I kind of take issue with the second team he laid out potentially to keep your eye on, which is the San Francisco 49ers. Because the 49ers are kind of in the midst of this disarray right now. They kind of haven't seemed to figure their life out yet. They're in the same boat. They're at the bottom of the NFC West with 3-5 overall record. And they also have a pretty deep wide receiving core with George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and Mohamed Sanu. Now, I think Odell Beckham Jr. could crack that rotation, but you're also joining an offense in Kyle Shanahan who utilizes the run game a lot, sometimes more than the throw game, than the pass game. Jimmy G is your quarterback. Again, I don't think that Jimmy G is that bad. Is Odell Beckham Jr. going to be frustrated if Jimmy G isn't going to hit him on some deep balls, that's the problem. That's kind of the problem. So I don't think he's necessarily the best fit in San Francisco personally. And again, with the playoff format, 4 automatic bids if you win the division, then there's only 3 wildcard games. So now you throw the 49ers in with the Seahawks, with the Rams, with the Saints, with the Falcons, with the Vikings, even the Bears and the Eagles are 3-6. They've got a shot. There are a lot of teams that are kind of in the mix. And I just, even if the 49ers can squeak into the playoffs, is anyone really viewing them as a Super Bowl contender? Not really. And then finally, the New Orleans Saints, I actually think from a fit perspective, it's great. I actually really like the New Orleans Saints. They're 5-3. They're in a great position right now, just trailing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by a game in their own division. I like Sean Payton. I like the offensive scheme that he brings. The personnel is great in New Orleans. And Odell Beckham Jr. would fit perfectly given the fact Michael Thomas unfortunately experienced the setback, which is forcing him to miss the remainder of the year. So he would certainly receive a lot of targets. The only problem with the Saints is who's going to be throwing him the ball. Is it going to be Taysom Hill? Is it going to be Trevor Siemian? Does he want either one of those two guys throwing him the ball? Personally, I don't think that's the best option out there. I really don't, and I think it's as simple as that. He wants someone who is a highly touted quarterback to be able to hit him on his runs. That's what I think. That's what I think. So I don't necessarily, again, I like that it's certainly a good fit, but is he going to be thrilled with the play at the quarterback position? Which is why, for me, the one team that I think would benefit greatly from Odell Beckham Jr., and I think that Odell Beckham Jr. should want to go play for, is the Las Vegas Raiders. I think it's a match made in heaven. The Raiders with Rich Bisaccia right now, I understand that they've been on this turbulent ride and they've had to kind of deal with a bunch of off-the-field distractions. But the reality is, unfortunately, they're 5-3 despite all of that chaos. So they're firmly in the playoff hunt, and they're only about 2 games back of the best overall record in the AFC. They're only a game back of the second best record in the conference. They're tied for the third best record in the conference right now. They're tied for the best record in their own division in the AFC West. So I really like the Las Vegas Raiders. I think Derek Carr is showing once again why he's a really good quarterback in the NFL. And unfortunately, due to the tragic and unfortunate events regarding Henry Ruggs, there's a void that they need to fill. The Las Vegas Raiders need a vertical threat. They need another playmaker on the outside, and that's something that Odell Beckham Jr. can fit in and provide. And I think that he would see a lot of targets because outside of Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, Odell Beckham Jr. is the next guy. It was Henry Ruggs, obviously not anymore. So Odell Beckham Jr., I think, could fit beautifully with the Las Vegas Raiders. Again, he'd be joining a winning team, a team that has legitimate aspirations for a run at the Super Bowl. And though as a conference, there are more better teams in the AFC, I think the only legitimate Super Bowl contenders right now are all in the NFC. So I think that this would be a way to stay away from the NFC, from Tom Brady and the Bucs, from the Packers, from the Cardinals, from the Rams. You stay away from that and you play in kind of like a wild, wild west AFC style conference. And on top of that, you're living in Las Vegas. So personality-wise, it fits perfectly. You're living in a vibrant city, a buzzing city, passionate fan base. There's entertainment around you. That's the kind of lifestyle that Odell Beckham Jr. wants to be a part of. And I think the Las Vegas Raiders would be a perfect fit, especially given the circumstances right now at their skilled positions. That's where I'd recommend he'd go, and that's the team that I think should seriously consider trying to pick him up off the waiver, is the Las Vegas Raiders.